In this next lesson, we're going to do division, and our division problems are going to have some remainders. They're going to have leftover pieces. Our divisor is not going to be able to go in evenly into our dividend. Let's take a look at a problem. We're first going to take a look at all the different parts of our division problem so we understand what a remainder is and what part it represents. We have two different division problems written out here. They're the same problem, just written in two different ways. On the top, we have 37 divided by 4 equals 9, remainder 1. Our 37, our larger number, is our dividend. Our 4 is going to be going into our larger number. It's going to be separating that larger number into equal pieces. Our quotient is the number of equal pieces, and the remainder is what is left over. If we take a look at the bottom, we have the same thing, just in a different format. So our quotient is going to be those equal pieces that we're going to be separating into. Our divisor is how many sets are we going to separate. We have our dividend, which is what's going to be separated. And then we have our remainder, which is what's left. Let's take a look at a problem, and we're going to draw a picture to help us identify how to understand our remainder. In this problem, we have 10 divided by 4. So we're going to have 4 groups. And we need to divide 10 out evenly. So I'm going to use a red dot. And I'm going to put a dot in each until I've gotten to 10. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. But I only have 2 left and I have 4 boxes. Those 2 are going to be left over. So if I'm looking at this problem and I'm determining what my quotient is and what my remainder is, I'm going to see how many equal pieces do I have that I've separated out into each of my circles. I have 2. I have 2 red dots in each of my circles, and then what's left over? I have a remainder of 2. These 2 pieces right here are my leftovers. So my answer to this problem is 2 as my quotient, and then I have a remainder of 2. Now, one way for me to check my work with multiplication, because we know that division is the opposite of multiplication, is to take my divisor and multiply it times my quotient. So I would multiply 4 times 2, because that's my divisor is 4 and my quotient is 2, and I get a product of 8. And then I'd take my 8 and I'd add my remainder. 8 plus 2 is equal to 10. Whatever I get there should equal my dividend, which it does. Here's what this is saying. When I'm doing my multiplication, this says 4 groups of 2. That's exactly what I had in my circles. I had 4 groups of 2 dots in each circle, and then I had my remainder 2 left over. Let's take a look at another problem. This problem we have 17 divided by 5. Now we can draw a picture for all these problems, but the larger our numbers get, the more drawing we're going to have to do. So what we want to start thinking about is multiplication to help us with our division. In our last lesson, one of the ways that we were able to find our estimate of our quotient was to list our multiples. We can use multiples here to help us as well. Because I'm dealing with some pretty small numbers, I'm going to start with 5 times 1, and then I'm going to go from there. Now the key is I have to stop as soon as I get over my dividend of 17. Now, when I was doing my other lesson, when I was finding my estimate, it was okay for me to go over my dividend. When I'm finding my remainder and my quotient and my remainder, I cannot go over my dividend. So my dividend is 17, and my products and my multiples cannot go over that dividend. So I'm going to cross 5 times 4 out. I'm not going to be using that one, but I am going to use the one that's just below what my dividend is, which is 5 times 3 gives me 15. And I'm going to put my box around that factor of 3. That's going to be my quotient. Now I need to think, what more do I need to add to 15 to get it all the way up to 17? 15 plus what is going to equal 17? Well, 15 plus 2 is going to equal 17, so my remainder is equal to 2. If I check my work with multiplication, I would multiply my quotient times my divisor, so 5 times 3, and that gives me 15. And then I would add my remainder, so 15 plus 2 gives me 17. And this last piece, my 17, needs to add up and be the same as my dividend, which it is. So one way for me to figure out what my quotient is going to be and what my remainder is going to be is by listing my multiples. I list my multiples, I find what falls just below my dividend, and then what do I need to add in order to get that number. Let's do another one. I want you to take a look at this problem. 33 divided by 7. I want to know what is my quotient and what is my remainder. You need to think in your head, 7 times what gets me close to 33, but I can't go over. Now, here's another little thing that I hadn't mentioned. Let's say we thought that our answer was 3. 7 times 3 gives me 21. Well, if I have 21, how many more do I need to add to get all the way up to 33? I would have a remainder of 12. Our remainder can never be larger than our divisor. If our remainder is larger than our divisor, then we could have done more splitting up. Think about it this way. If you're sharing 33 cookies with 7 friends, or you and 6 friends, and you had 12 cookies left over, you'd want to pass the rest of those cookies out. You wouldn't want all those cookies sitting off to the side. So our remainder can never be larger than our divisor. If our remainder ends up being larger than our divisor, then we need to add at least one more to our quotient, and we're going to need to divide again. Okay, so with that being said, our answer is not 3 remainder 12, but 7 times 4 gives me 28. And then I need to count up from 28 till I get to 33. 28, 29, 30, 31, 32, 33. So I have a remainder of 5. So my answer is 4, remainder 5. If I check my work with multiplication, I'm going to multiply 7 times 4, which gives me 28. And then I have to add 28 plus 5, and that gives me 33, which is what I started with as my dividend. Okay? Our next problem, 46 divided by 8. Go ahead and solve this problem. I want to know what is your quotient and what is your remainder. We need to think about multiplication in our head. 8 times what gets me close to 46, but I can't go over. So I would think about my 8 facts. I know that 8 times 4 is 32. That's too little. 8 times 5 gives me 40. That's pretty close. 8 times 6 is 48. That's over. I can't go over. So my answer, my quotient is going to be 5. And then I need to count up from there. So I need to multiply 8 times 5. That gives me 40. 40 plus what gives me 46? 6 more as my remainder. I can check with multiplication by multiplying 8 times 5 and getting 40. And then I have 40 plus 6, and that gives me 46, which is my dividend. All right, next problem. 20 divided by 7. What is my quotient and what is my remainder? Again, I need to think about multiplication in my head. 7 times what gets me close to 20, but I can't go over. Well, 7 times 2 gives me 14. 7 times 3 gives me 21. Oh, 21's too much, so I need to go with 7 times 2. 7 times 2 is 14. 14 plus what gives me 20? 6 more. I'm going to check with multiplication. So 7 times 2 gives me 14. 14 plus 6 gives me 20, which is my dividend. All right, next problem. 52 divided by 6. Go ahead and solve this problem. What is your quotient and what is your remainder? Well, 6 times what gets me close to 52 without going over? I have to do my 6 facts in my head. I know that 6 times 5 is 30. That's too little. 6 times 6, 36. Still too little. 6 times 7, 42. Keep going. 6 times 8, 48. That's pretty close. 6 times 9 is 54. That goes over. So I need to stick with 6 times 8. So my quotient is 8. 6 times 8 is 48. Plus 4 more gives me 52. So my answer is 8 remainder of 4. 8 is my quotient. 4 is my remainder. I'm going to check with multiplication. 6 times 8 gives me 48. 48 plus 4 gives me 52, which is my dividend. Last problem of this lesson is a word problem. John and his two friends have 16 baseball cards to share evenly. How many baseball cards will they each get? How many baseball cards will be left over? What equation am I going to use to solve this problem? Well, I have John and his two friends. So if I have 1 plus 2, that gives me 3 people are sharing 16 baseball cards. So 16 divided by 3. And they're sharing them evenly. Division's all about doing things evenly. So I need to divide. How many times does 3 go into 16? That will tell me how many baseball cards they're each going to get. That's going to give me my quotient. And then what's left over? What's my remainder? Solve for this problem. Well, 3 times 3 is 9. 3 times 4 is 12. 3 times 5 is 15. 3 times 6 is 18. 18 is too much, so I need to stick with 5. And then I have a remainder of 1. Now, I need to understand what I'm talking about here. So I go back to my problem and I want to know how many baseball cards will they each get? They're each going to get what our quotient is. If I was dealing the cards out to them, every person would get 5 cards. So that answers my first question of how many cards will they get. And then my second question says how many baseball cards will be left over. That's going to be my remainder here. In our next lesson, we're going to talk about how do we know when we're just using our quotient? How do we know when we're just using our remainder? How do we know when we're supposed to make a fraction with our remainder? Or how do we know when we're supposed to add one more to our quotient? We're going to talk all about what those remainders mean and how to interpret them. Okay, that's our lesson for today. Takeaways from today's lesson: make sure that when you are dividing and you're using your multiples in your head, that you can't go over. We have to stay under. Also, make sure that your remainder is never larger than your divisor. If your remainder is larger than your divisor, then you've done something wrong. Make sure you go back and you check your work. And lastly, you can always check your division with multiplication. We multiply our divisor, which in this case would be our 3, times our quotient, in this case is our 5. We get a product, and then we're going to add our remainder. And when we do that, we should end up with our dividend. All right, that's our lesson for today. See you tomorrow.